Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to challenge, well, pretty much everything you think you know about finding tranquility, success, and happiness. If you've ever felt completely exhausted by the constant pressure to just look on the bright side or think positive, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to explore a totally different, honestly kind of counterintuitive path to peace of mind. So, let me ask you a question. What if trying to be happy is exactly what's making you miserable? Seriously, think about it. We live in a culture that is just obsessed with optimism. We're constantly told, visualize success, banish negative thoughts, smile through the pain, and everything's going to work out perfectly. But let's be real, how often does that actually work for you? If you've got some secret frustrations with the modern self-help industry, trust me, you are not alone. And the best part? Science actually backs you up. The philosopher John Stuart Mill hit the nail on the head with this paradox. He wrote, "Ask yourself whether you are happy, and you cease to be so." It's kind of like happiness can only be seen out of the corner of your eye, right? The second you stare directly at it and try to grab it, poof, it vanishes. Which leaves us with a pretty massive dilemma. If chasing happiness directly just pushes it further away, what on earth are we supposed to do instead? Okay, let's dive into this. To find an answer, we're looking at some brilliant insights from a book called The Antidote, Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking, by psychology journalist Oliver Burkeman. He basically went on this global journey, talking to psychologists, philosophers, and Buddhist teachers to find a radical alternative to all this forced optimism. He calls it the negative path to happiness. But before we look at the cure, we really need to understand the disease. To see this cult of optimism at its absolute unhinged peak, Berkman visited a massive Get Motivated seminar in a Texas basketball stadium. Just picture this for a second. Rock anthems are blaring, pyrotechnics are going off, and you've got this deeply tanned 83-year-old motivational guru, Dr. Robert Schuller, pacing the stage. And the climax of his whole speech? He literally barks at a crowd of 15,000 people to take the word impossible and completely cut it out of their lives forever. In this space, failure is just not an option you're even allowed to entertain. But here's the thing. There is a massive, actually kind of terrifying danger hidden in this mindset. It's the positivity trap. When you're relentlessly focused on success and you completely deny the possibility of failure, you create these huge, irrational blind spots. Berkman points out how this unfalsifiable ideology plays out in the real world, and it's pretty wild. For example, he neutrally observes how political leaders, like former President George W. Bush, used optimism to kind of reinterpret the darker days of their administrations. And social critics point out that this exact same culture of forced optimism totally infected the financial sector too. Executives and bankers just ignored dizzying levels of debt because they wouldn't look at the possibility of failure, which directly contributed to the 2008 global financial crisis. So, yeah, forced optimism can be an absolute disaster on a societal level. But what's it doing to our brains on a personal level? Well, the 19th century novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky actually pegged this psychological backfire perfectly with this incredibly cruel little parlor game. He wrote, "Try to pose for yourself this task, not to think of a polar bear, and you will see that the cursed thing will come to mind every minute." All right, I'm going to challenge you right now. For the next 10 seconds, you are absolutely not allowed to think about a white bear. Ready? Go. All right, I'm going to challenge you right now. For the next 10 seconds, you are absolutely not allowed to think about a white bear. Ready? All right, time's up. How'd you do? If you're like literally every other human being on the planet, your mind was immediately flooded with images of a white bear. Or, at the very least, you were stressing yourself out about the sheer effort of not thinking about one. The reason your brain just totally failed that challenge comes down to what Harvard psychologist Daniel Wegner calls ironic process theory. Basically, here's how it works. When you tell your brain to suppress a thought, like our white bear, or maybe a nagging worry, you try to force alternative thoughts into your head. But at the exact same time, a part of your brain has to act like a background monitor. It's constantly scanning your thoughts just to make sure you aren't thinking about the bear. Now, if you're stressed or tired or just trying way too hard, that monitoring process jumps right to the front of your consciousness. So the very act of checking if you're thinking negatively, ironically, forces you to think negatively. It's wild. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this ironic backfire applies to everyday self-help tools. Take daily affirmations, for example. Psychologist Joanne Wood tested the classic phrase, "I am a lovable person," on two different groups. For people who already had high self-esteem, sure, they felt slightly better. But for people with low self-esteem, the exact people these affirmations are supposed to help, they actually felt appreciably worse. Why? Because forcing that positive message deeply conflicted with their actual self-image. Trying to convince themselves they were lovable just reminded them of all the reasons they secretly believed they weren't. It just solidified the negativity. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark divide between modern self-help and ancient wisdom. The modern approach is all about positive visualization. But here's the catch. Psychologist Gabrielle Eddingen found that when mildly dehydrated people vividly visualize drinking an icy glass of water, their blood pressure actually drops. Their bodies relax as if they've already achieved the goal, which completely saps their energy and motivation to act. On the flip side, look at the ancient Stoic approach, the premeditation of evils. Instead of imagining everything going perfectly, the Stoics of ancient Greece and Rome actively imagined things going terribly, terribly wrong. You're probably wondering, why on earth would they do that? Well, one major reason is to fight off hedonic adaptation. This is that frustrating psychological reality where any new pleasure, like a new phone, a big promotion, even a new relationship, swiftly fades into the backdrop of our lives and just stops bringing us joy. The Stoic antidote? Regularly remind yourself that you could lose the things you love. The philosopher Epictetus actually went so far as to say that when you kiss your child goodnight, you should remind yourself they are mortal. I know, it sounds super jarring, but by contemplating loss, you pull the things you love out of the background and put them back center stage. It counterintuitively makes you appreciate them so much more right now. The Stoics didn't just stop there. They used negativity to kill anxiety too. Enter Albert Ellis, a famous psychologist who, to conquer his own crippling anxieties and later help his patients, prescribed real-world Stoic experiments. One of the best is the subway station exercise. The assignment? Ride to London Underground or the New York subway and literally shout out the name of every single station as you arrive. Burkeman actually went and tried this himself. The anticipation was physically nauseating for him, but once he actually started shouting out the stops, he realized people barely even looked up from their phones and newspapers. The massive catastrophe he had built up in his head simply didn't happen. Ellis used exercises exactly like this to systematically deconstruct fear. It's a clear method. Step 1, identify your absolute worst-case scenario. Step 2, logically ask yourself, is this 100% terrible? Like, is it the literal destruction of the universe? No, it's not. And step 3, recognize that the outcome is merely highly undesirable. Getting rejected, losing a job, or looking like a fool on a train, it's not an actual catastrophe. By taking these infinite, vague fears and turning them into finite, manageable scenarios, the worst case totally loses its paralyzing power over you. Which brings us to another ancient pillar of the negative path, Buddhism. The modern path of forced positivity demands that we constantly cling to good feelings and aggressively shove away the bad ones. It is an exhausting, endless struggle. But the Buddhist alternative is non-attachment. Now, this doesn't mean abandoning your life and moving to a cave. It simply means approaching your inner thoughts and outer events without fiercely clinging to the good stuff or completely panicking over the bad stuff. So the crucial point is how we actually view our own minds. According to classical Buddhist psychology texts like the Abhidhamma, we should view the mind as literally just another sense organ. Think about it. You don't try to control what your ears hear or what your nose smells, right? It's just sensory input. The Buddhists argue we should treat our thoughts the exact same way. Thoughts are just internal weather. You don't have to believe a negative thought is the absolute truth, and you definitely don't need to fight it. You just observe it, without judgment, as it passes through the sense store of the mind. To prove just how incredibly powerful this non-attached observation can be, let's look at a study by psychologist Fatal Zaidan. Participants were given mild, but definitely painful, electric shocks. One group was taught basic mindfulness, basically just observing their thoughts and physical sensations without judgment. When they were shocked again, that mindfulness group experienced pain reductions of up to an astonishing 93%. 93! By not fighting the pain and not agonizing over the anticipation of the next shock, the actual suffering practically vanished. And you can apply this principle of non-attachment to everyday struggles too, like procrastination. Most motivational gurus will tell you that you need to pump yourself up and feel motivated before you can start a task. But guess what? That is just another attachment to an emotion. The negative path teaches us action without emotion. You can observe that feeling of, I really don't want to do this work right now, completely accept that the feeling is there, and then just start the work anyway. You literally do not need to manufacture the right emotion to take action. Blending these ancient Stoic and Buddhist techniques gives us a realistic, science-backed counterweight to that toxic cult of optimism. But, as Oliver Burkeman's book makes clear, this negative path is an antidote, not a magic panacea. It isn't about becoming some miserable pessimist. It's about recognizing that constant, forced positivity is just exhausting and honestly pretty fragile. True tranquility comes from building the mental muscle to stare directly into uncertainty, discomfort, and negativity, and realizing, hey, I can absolutely handle this. Let's move to and see how this builds to a perfect final metaphor, the Chinese finger trap. If you've ever played with one of these little woven bamboo toys, you know exactly how it goes. You stick your index fingers in both ends, and your immediate instinct is to pull away to escape. But the harder you pull, the tighter the trap constricts around your fingers. The only way to win, the completely counterintuitive move, is to relax, stop struggling, and actually push your fingers deeper into the trap. Only by leaning into the discomfort does the trap loosen, finally setting you free. And this brings us to the philosopher Alan Watts, who brilliantly summarized this entire explainer as the backwards law. He said, when you try to stay on the surface of the water, you sink. But when you try to sink, you float. We spend our entire lives frantically paddling to stay on the surface of positivity, terrified of the dark water down below, and we just exhaust ourselves in the process. So what if you stopped fighting? What if leaning into the negative, accepting failure, embracing uncertainty, and premeditating the worst is actually your ultimate path to true, unshakable happiness? It's a profound thought to carry with you. Thank you for joining me on this explainer today, and I challenge you, let yourself sink a little bit today. You might just find that you float.